My radio picked up a voice, 30 years after the zombie outbreak. I haven't spoken to another living person in 6 years. I know the exact number because I keep a calendar scratched into the concrete wall beside my cot. Every morning, a new line. Before that, there was Mara. Before Mara, there was the convoy. Before the convoy, there was the world. But that world has been dead for 30 years now. And I've stopped mourning it, the way you stop mourning a grandparent you barely remember. The grief becomes architecture. You build your life on top of it. My name is Elliot Voss. I'm 53 years old, and I live alone in what used to be a municipal water treatment facility on the outskirts of what used to be called Redfield, Iowa. The building is ugly, squat, concrete, windowless in the sections that matter, and that ugliness has kept me alive. The infected don't break what doesn't interest them. They're drawn to sound, to light, to the geometry of human habitation. A water treatment plant looks like nothing. It looks like a tomb. That's the point. I run my generator 2 hours a day, dawn and dusk, pulling power from a biodiesel setup I've spent a decade refining. Soybean oil mostly, scavenged from agricultural stores that no one else has been desperate enough to reach. During those 2 hours, I do the things that keep the machinery of survival turning. I charge batteries, I pump water through my filtration stack, I run the perimeter sensors, and I listen to the radio. The radio is a Yaesu FT991A, a transceiver I pulled from an amateur operator's home in year 11. The man was dead in his chair, headphones still on, a brown stain beneath him that I tried not to look at. I took the radio, his manuals, his antenna components, and I left without ceremony. Since then, I've listened every single day. I've transmitted twice a week for 19 years. The same message, the same frequencies, the same flat voice reading coordinates and offering contact. No one has ever answered. I need you to understand that. 19 years of silence. 7,000 transmissions into a void so complete, it became its own companion. Static has texture once you've lived inside it long enough. It breathes. It shifts pitch with atmospheric conditions. It carries the ghost of a world that used to fill every frequency with noise. I learned to find comfort in it. I learned to stop expecting anything else. Last Tuesday, something answered. I was running my dusk cycle, scanning through the 40-meter band the way I always do. Methodical, patient, the dial moving in precise increments. The static was heavy that evening, a low-pressure system pulling moisture in from the west. I almost missed it. A syllable buried under hiss. I stopped the dial, leaned forward, adjusted the filter bandwidth. A voice, a human voice, female, mid-range, calm in a way that immediately unsettled me, because calm requires safety, and safety doesn't exist anymore. If anyone is receiving, this is Dr. Lena Cassidy, broadcasting from Facility 7, coordinates 39.8 north, 94.7 west. We are operational. Repeat, we are operational. If you are receiving, respond on this frequency. We monitor continuously. I sat there for a long time. My hand was shaking, not from fear. I've burned through every variety of fear this world offers. But from something structural, something that felt like the floor tilting beneath a belief I'd cemented in place. There were no facilities. There were no doctors. There were no organizations using words like operational and continuously. There were only survivors, scattered and diminishing, dying alone in their concrete tombs. I didn't respond. I sat there through the rest of my power window, listening to her repeat the message 3 more times, identical in cadence and wording. When my generator coughed to silence, I stayed in the dark for an hour, my hand resting on the transmit button, feeling the cold plastic under my thumb. Something was wrong, not wrong in the way that infected crawling across your perimeter at midnight is wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't name. A dissonance between what I'd heard and what 30 years of survival had taught me was possible. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my cot and listened to the silence and tried to remember the last time anything had genuinely surprised me. Morning brought rationality the way it always does. Gray light leaking through ventilation slats, the smell of recycled air, my body pulling itself through routine, because routine is the skeleton that holds a solitary life upright. I boiled water. I ate cold beans from a can I'd sealed myself 3 years ago. I checked perimeter sensors and found nothing. No motion alerts, no thermal signatures, nothing but the empty fields and the rusted fence line and the distant tree line where I sometimes spot movement that I choose not to investigate. By the time I ran my dawn cycle, I'd constructed 4 explanations for what I'd heard. First, hallucination. Possible. Solitude does things to the mind that I've documented in my own journals. Conversations with remembered people, moments where the border between thought and perception dissolves. But I've always recognized those episodes. They carry a quality of softness, of wish fulfillment. This hadn't felt like that. The voice had details, coordinates, a name. Second, a recording. Some automated system still running on solar or nuclear backup, broadcasting a loop that its creator recorded decades ago. This was plausible. I'd encountered automated signals before. A weather station in year 8 that still dutifully reported conditions for a city that no longer existed. But those signals were degraded, distorted, clearly mechanical. This voice had been clean, present. Third, a trap. In the early years, raiders used radio to lure people. Broadcast distress signals, wait for someone to arrive, take everything they had. But that was 20 years ago, when there were enough people to make raiding viable. The mathematics of predation require prey density, and the human population had dropped below that threshold long before I stopped encountering others. Fourth, it was real. Someone, somewhere, had maintained or rebuilt infrastructure sufficient to sustain a facility, a doctor, a continuous broadcast capability. This was the explanation I most wanted to reject, because hope is the most dangerous substance in this world, more dangerous than any infected. Hope makes you move. Movement makes you visible. Visibility makes you dead. I turned on the transceiver at 0600 exactly, dialed to the same frequency, waited, static, dense, rolling, atmospheric. I listened for 40 minutes, adjusting filters, narrowing bandwidth, pulling at the signal like thread from cloth. Nothing. At 0647, the voice returned. Broadcasting from Facility 7, coordinates 39.8 north, 94.7 west. We are operational. If you are receiving, respond on this frequency. We have resources, we have medical capability, we have security. You are not alone. That last sentence hit differently than the rest. It was the only part that felt human rather than procedural. You are not alone. A statement designed to reach into the specific wound that long-term survivors carry. Whoever wrote this script, because it was a script, repeated verbatim, understood isolation, understood what those words would do to someone hearing them after years of silence. I pressed the transmit button, held it. My throat worked around words that felt foreign in my mouth. I hadn't spoken aloud in weeks. This is Elliot Voss. I'm receiving you. Confirm you're live. I released the button. The static returned, unchanged. 30 seconds. A minute. I was already building the architecture of disappointment, already telling myself it was a recording after all. When the pattern broke. Elliot? A pause. Not a scripted pause. A human pause. The kind that contains surprise. Elliot, this is Dr. Cassidy. You're the first response we've received in 14 months. Can you confirm your location? My heart was doing something it hadn't done in years, beating with purpose rather than mere persistence. I looked around my concrete room, at the scratched calendar, at the stacked cans, at the life I'd built around the certainty that this was all there would ever be. Iowa, I said. Former Redfield area. I'm fortified. I'm alone. How long alone? 6 years since last human contact. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted. Warmer, but controlled. Professional warmth. The kind they teach. Elliot, I want you to know that what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. But I need you to listen carefully. I leaned forward. The static breathed between us like a living thing. We have a cure. The words existed in the air between my radio and my comprehension for several seconds without connecting. I heard them. I processed the phonetics. But meaning refused to arrive, the way a key refuses a lock it wasn't cut for. Repeat that, I said. A functional treatment, not a vaccine. The infection is too integrated for prevention at this stage. But a reversal protocol. We've been administering it for 3 years, with consistent results. Stage 1 and Stage 2 infected respond within 72 hours. Stage 3 requires longer, but shows meaningful cognitive recovery within 2 weeks. I pulled my hand away from the transmit button as if it had burned me. Stage 3. Those were the ones I saw in the field sometimes. The ones who'd lost all human architecture, moving on damaged limbs. Skulls misshapen from years of cranial swelling, producing that sound that was neither moan nor scream, but something between. Something that lived in a frequency that triggered mammalian terror at the brainstem level. The idea of those things recovering, of there being a person still inside. Elliot, are you still receiving? I pressed transmit. I'm here. I'm processing. Take your time. I know what this sounds like. It sounds like a lie, I said. There was no point in politeness. Politeness belongs to a social contract that dissolved 3 decades ago. It sounds like something designed to make me do something stupid. I understand that response. It's the same response we've gotten from every survivor we've contacted. The ones who responded at all. She paused. I can provide you with technical details if that would help establish credibility. Or I can simply tell you that we're 240 miles from your position, and we have the capability to reach you. You have vehicles? We have vehicles. Fuel production, armed escort capacity. We've conducted 11 successful extractions in the past 18 months. Extractions. The word belonged to a vocabulary I'd abandoned. Military, organizational, institutional. Words that implied structure, chain of command, resources allocated toward objectives. I'd stopped believing in objectives beyond sunrise. Why now? I asked. 30 years in, and now you have a cure. The research began before the collapse. Facility 7 was part of a government continuity program, biological containment and research. We went dark in year 2 when external security failed. Spent the first decade just surviving, like everyone else. But we had laboratories. We had scientists. We had samples. The work continued underground, literally and figuratively. 3 years ago, Dr. Ibrahim Osei achieved a breakthrough in prion analog disruption. Since then, we've been rebuilding outward. I sat with this. The generator hummed beneath me. I was burning fuel I couldn't afford, but I couldn't bring myself to cut the power. How many people? I asked. At your facility? Currently, 312. 47 are recovered infected. Recovered. Living, cognitive, verbal, some memory loss, particularly from the later stages, but functional, human. I closed my eyes. Behind my lids, I saw Marcus, my brother, the way he looked in month 3, before we'd understood the stages, before we knew that the swelling was progressive and irreversible. The way he'd looked at me from behind the chain link we'd put between us, still knowing my name, still saying it, but with something behind his eyes that was already forgetting what the name meant. Elliot, I'm going to be transparent with you. We're contacting survivors not only to offer rescue, we need people. The recovered infected are alive, but many require ongoing care. Our facility needs hands, skills, contribution. This isn't charity, it's recruitment. Honest, I said. We've found that honesty works better than promises. Survivors who've lasted this long don't respond to idealism. She was right about that. I respected the approach even as I distrusted it. I need to think, I said. Of course. We broadcast on this frequency every 6 hours. When you're ready to talk again, we'll be here. How long before your extraction capability becomes unavailable? There's no deadline, Elliot. You've survived 30 years. We're not going to pressure you into a bad decision. I killed the power, sat in the dark, listened to my own breathing, and tried to separate what I wanted to believe from what was safe to believe. The gap between those two things has kept me alive for 3 decades. 3 days passed before I transmitted again. During those 3 days, I did what I always do when faced with a decision that could kill me. I gathered information, tested assumptions, and argued with myself in the notebooks I keep stacked by the dozen in my storage room. The coordinates she'd given me placed Facility 7 in eastern Kansas, former Fort Riley area, which tracked with her claim of government continuity infrastructure. I had old road maps, pre-collapse, laminated and annotated over the years with my own observations. Blocked routes, collapsed bridges, infected density zones mapped from what I could observe and what old contacts had reported before they went silent. The path between here and there was 240 miles of open country, small town corridors, river crossings, and at least 3 zones I'd marked in red years ago. Areas where infected congregated in numbers that made passage suicidal. But she'd said they could come to me. Vehicles, armed escort. That meant they'd navigated these dangers successfully at least 11 times. It meant they had route intelligence, fuel logistics, weaponry. It meant they were real in a way that the cramped confines of my concrete world struggled to accommodate. On the second day, I walked my perimeter. This is a ritual I perform every week. Checking the fence line, clearing vegetation that could provide cover, examining the motion sensors for damage. The fields around the plant stretch flat in every direction, winter-browned soybean stubble from last year's unharvested growth. To the south, I could see 3 infected standing motionless in what used to be a drainage ditch, maybe 400 meters out. Stage 2s, upright, but with the characteristic head tilt that indicates advanced cranial pressure. They'd been there for weeks. They never approached. They seemed to be waiting for something, or perhaps they'd simply stopped, the way a machine stops when it runs out of whatever force was driving it. I watched them through my binoculars, tried to imagine them recovering, tried to imagine those skulls depressurizing, those eyes refocusing, those mouths forming words. The image wouldn't resolve. It sat in my mind like a photograph that refused to develop. On the third day, I found something during my interior inspection that changed my calculus. The secondary fuel tank, the reserve I keep sealed for emergencies, showed corrosion along the lower seam. Not critical yet, but progressing. I had perhaps 8 months before it failed, and without it, my biodiesel reserves would have. That meant having my power cycles. That meant having my broadcast capability, my water filtration, my sensor coverage. The math was clear and cold. My infrastructure was aging faster than I could maintain it alone. This is the truth that solitary survivors don't broadcast, that no one writes in the journals that future scavengers might find. You don't die from infected. You die from entropy. You die because a seal corrodes, because a belt wears, because a circuit board degrades, because the universe moves constantly toward disorder, and a single pair of hands cannot hold it back forever. That evening, I powered up at dusk, found the frequency, waded through 2 minutes of static that felt like holding my breath underwater. Dr. Cassidy, this is Elliot Voss. The response came in 8 seconds. Elliot, good to hear you. How are you feeling? I have questions. Go ahead. Your extractions. Describe the process. How many people in the team? What vehicles? What's the timeline from contact to arrival? She didn't hesitate. This was clearly a briefing she'd given before. Extraction team is 6 personnel. 2 armored vehicles, modified Humvees with additional plating. Travel time to your position is approximately 16 hours, including security stops and route verification. Once we establish a pickup window, we move within 48 hours. What do you need from me? A safe approach corridor to your position, visual confirmation signals so we can identify your location without radio communication in the final approach. We go radio silent within 10 miles to avoid drawing attention, and your commitment to depart when we arrive. We don't make the trip twice. One chance. Resources are finite, even for us. I respected that too. The economy of survival doesn't allow for unlimited generosity. I was building a picture of these people. Pragmatic, organized, honest about limitations. Everything a lie wouldn't need to be. Tell me about the recovered, I said. The 47, what are they like? A brief silence. When she spoke, her clinical tone softened slightly, not into sentimentality, but into something more careful. They're people, Elliot. Damaged people. Most have significant memory gaps. The infection period is largely absent, which our neurologists believe is a mercy. They remember who they were before. They wake up in a body that's been through years of deterioration, in a world that's changed beyond recognition, surrounded by people they don't know. Do they know what they did? During? Some have fragmentary impressions, sensory echoes, nothing coherent enough to constitute narrative memory. Dr. Osei believes the prion analog disrupts hippocampal consolidation during active infection, which is why I don't need the mechanism. I need to know if they're dangerous. They're not. Post-recovery behavioral monitoring shows no aggression patterns, no relapse indicators. They're confused. They're grieving. But they're not dangerous. I thought about Marcus again. Stage 1 when we'd last been face to face. Still verbal, still himself enough to tell me to lock the door, still cognizant enough to be afraid. I'd done what he asked. I'd locked the door. I'd listened to what happened on the other side of it for 6 hours until the sound stopped resembling anything human. Then I'd left the building and never gone back. If someone was stage 1 when last seen, I said, keeping my voice flat. And that was 27 years ago. What stage would they be now? Stage 3, almost certainly. But stage 3 remains treatable. Recovery takes longer, 2 to 4 weeks for initial cognitive return. Full rehabilitation can take months, but it's achievable. I wasn't asking for Marcus. Marcus had been in Denver, and Denver fell completely in year 4. Burned, overrun, abandoned. The chances of him still existing, even as a stage 3, were negligible. But the question had escaped before I could cage it, and now it sat between us, revealing something about me that I hadn't intended to reveal. Someone specific? She asked gently. Everyone had someone specific. Yes, they did. She let the silence hold for a moment. Elliot, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. Go ahead. What's keeping you there? Not tactically. I understand defensive position, resource access, familiarity. I mean internally. What's the argument you're making to yourself for staying? It was a disarming question, direct in a way that forced introspection I generally avoid, because introspection in isolation becomes circular, becomes pathological, becomes the kind of spiral that ends with a person deciding they don't need to scratch tomorrow's line on the wall. I've survived 30 years by not trusting anything I can't verify with my own senses, I said. You're a voice on a radio. Voices on radios have been lies before. What would verification look like for you? I'd thought about this. I want to speak to one of them. A recovered. Silence. Not the silence of refusal, the silence of consideration. That's not standard protocol for initial contact. The recovered are in a delicate psychological state. External communication can be. That's my condition. I want to hear a person who is infected speak to me. Tell me their name. Tell me something that proves they were gone and now they're back. Then I'll give you my approach corridor. More silence. Then, I'll speak to our team. It may take 24 hours to arrange. Is that acceptable? I've been alone for 6 years. 24 hours is nothing. Then we'll speak again tomorrow. Same time. Elliot. She paused. Thank you for answering. For what it's worth, you're the 4th person we've made contact with this year. 2 agreed to extraction. 1 went silent. You're not wrong to be cautious, but you're also not wrong to want something different. I killed the power after she signed off. Sat in the dark again. But this time, the dark felt different. Not empty. Expectant, like a room holding its breath before someone opens the door. 24 hours. I spent them the way I spend every day. Maintenance, observation, survival labor. But my mind ran on a separate track, building and demolishing scenarios with equal fervor. I cataloged what I knew. A signal strong enough to reach me consistently on 40 meters. Which implied serious antenna infrastructure. A claim of government continuity, which was neither impossible nor confirmable from my position. A specific named scientist, a specific treatment claim, specific numbers. The specificity was either evidence of truth or evidence of a sophisticated operation designed to exploit exactly the kind of analytical mind that would demand specifics. I ate my evening meal, canned chicken, dried corn reconstituted in hot water, a luxury ration of instant coffee that I kept for occasions when my mind needed sharpening. The coffee was 8 years past any reasonable expiration. But sealed cans of freeze-dried grounds persist far beyond their dates. It tasted like memory, like the world before. At dusk, I powered up. The frequency was waiting, static rolling like distant surf. Elliot, this is Dr. Cassidy. I have someone here who'd like to speak with you. My hand tightened on the edge of my desk. Go ahead. A different voice. Male. Younger. 20s or 30s. Hard to tell precisely through transmission compression. There was a quality to it that I noticed immediately. Hesitancy. Not the hesitancy of deception, but the hesitancy of someone reassembling the mechanics of speech after a long absence. Hello? This is Thomas. Thomas Wren. They told me you wanted to talk to me. Thomas, how old are you? I'm 34, I think. They told me the year and I did the math, but it doesn't feel right. Nothing about time feels right. When were you infected? A long pause. I was 19. I was in a group. We were trying to get to some camp that someone said was safe. Missouri somewhere. We got hit on a road at night. I remember headlights. And then I remember waking up here. There's nothing in between. 15 years, I said. You were infected for 15 years. They said that. Dr. Osei explained it to me. I understand it intellectually. But in my body, I was 19 yesterday. My hands look wrong. My face in the mirror looks wrong. Everything. His voice caught. Not dramatically, quietly. The way a person catches themselves before they break in front of a stranger. You don't have to continue, I said. No, she said you needed this, that you needed to believe. So I'll tell you. He took a breath I could hear through the static. I remember the bite. I remember feeling sick. I remember being so scared that I couldn't stop shaking. And my friend Derek was holding my arm saying, it might not take. Sometimes it doesn't take, even though we both knew that was a lie. And then there's nothing. And then I woke up in a white room with people speaking to me slowly, like I was a child. And they told me 15 years had passed, and the world was still broken, but they could fix what was broken in me. And you believe them, I said. You believe you're fixed. I don't know what fixed means. I'm awake, I'm thinking. I'm afraid and confused and grieving for years I'll never get back. That feels real. That feels human. He was right. Grief is the most human verification there is. No lure, no trap, no recording would include grief like that. Raw and present and specifically wounded in a way that generic scripting could never achieve. Thank you, Thomas, I said. Did it help? Did I do what she needed? Yes, you can go. Cassidy's voice returned after a moment. Elliot? I was staring at my wall of scratch marks. 6 years of them. Days I'd survived for no reason beyond the animal refusal to stop. Send me your route protocol, I said. I'll prepare an approach corridor from the northeast. The south and west are compromised. Infected density too high for vehicle passage. Understood. We'll begin planning immediately. 48 hours to deployment. 48 hours. Stay safe, Elliot. I killed the power. In the darkness, something had changed. The room felt smaller. For 30 years, these walls had been sanctuary. Now, for the first time, they felt like what they actually were. A cage. 48 hours is nothing when you've measured time in years. But 48 hours is everything when it separates the life you've known from the life you've been offered. I spent the first 12 preparing my approach corridor, marking the northeast access road with reflective tape on fence posts, clearing debris from the final 300 meters of paved surface that led to my facility's service entrance. The road hadn't been driven on in decades. Grass had pushed through cracks in the asphalt, and in 2 places, small trees had rooted in the degraded surface. Their trunks no wider than my wrist, but stubborn with life, that I had to cut away with a handsaw. This was the most exposed I'd been in years. Outside the fence line, with tools that made noise, creating visual markers that could draw attention. The 3 stage 2s in the drainage ditch to the south had shifted position slightly. They were closer by perhaps 50 meters, orienting toward my activity. I worked faster, kept my rifle slung across my back, though I hadn't fired it in 2 years. Ammunition is a non-renewable resource when you have no supply chain. By hour 18, the corridor was ready. I retreated inside, sealed the perimeter, and began the second phase of preparation, the one I hadn't anticipated being so difficult. Packing. What do you take from a life that fits inside a concrete building? I stood in my storage room and looked at 30 years of accumulated survival architecture and felt paralyzed in a way that combat never made me feel. The canned goods? Leave them. The tools? Some, not all. The radio, obviously. My journals? 26 notebooks filled with observations, calculations, survival protocols, and the occasional desperate admission of loneliness that I wrote in the dark and pretended not to remember in the morning. I packed 3 bags, one with essential tools and the radio, one with food and water for 5 days, contingency against extraction failure, one with personal items, journals, a photograph of Marcus that had been in my wallet when the world ended, a Swiss Army knife that my father gave me when I turned 12. Then I waited. At hour 36, I ran my power cycle and found Cassidy on the frequency. Extraction team deployed, she confirmed. 6 personnel, 2 vehicles. Team leader is Sergeant Okoro. He'll make contact on close approach via short-range radio. Channel 7 on your unit. Understood. How are road conditions between your position and mine? Manageable. Our route avoids major urban centers. Primary concerns are 2 bridge crossings, one over the Kansas River, one over a tributary near Topeka. Both have been secured on previous runs. And infected presence along the route? Patchy. Rural Kansas is relatively low density. Iowa border area is higher. Agricultural infrastructure drew populations before collapse, and many infected remained in those areas. Your immediate surroundings may see increased activity as we approach. Engine noise carries. I know. I've prepared accordingly. One more thing, Elliot. When the team arrives, they'll need you ready to move immediately. The window between arrival and departure should be under 10 minutes. Extended stops in unsecured locations are the highest risk phase of any extraction. I'll be at the service entrance with my gear. 3 bags. 3 bags is fine. Anything that doesn't fit, we leave. No second trips. No second trips, I repeated. The finality of it settled in my chest like a stone dropped in still water. After the call, I walked through my facility one last time with different eyes. Not the eyes of a man performing maintenance, the eyes of a man saying goodbye. The filtration system I'd built over 7 years, each component a puzzle solved through trial and error. The sleeping area with its thermal insulation layered and relayered through bitter winters. The radio corner with its carefully routed wiring and the antenna feed passing through a sealed penetration in the concrete ceiling. I had built this place from nothing. It had kept me alive when everything else failed. And I was about to abandon it on the word of a voice and the grief of a stranger. 12 hours remained. I set my alarm and lay down on my cot for what I told myself would be the last time. I slept in fragments, an hour here, 40 minutes there, each stretch interrupted by a vigilance that wouldn't release its grip. At hour 42, my perimeter sensors triggered. East side. I was on my feet in 3 seconds, rifle in hand, moving through the dark corridor to my observation post with a fluidity that 30 years of practice had made automatic. Through the narrow slit I'd cut in the east wall, barely wider than my fist, invisible from outside. I scanned the tree line with my night vision monocular. The resolution was degrading. The device was 15 years old, and its image intensifier tube was slowly dying. But I could see enough. Movement. Multiple figures at the tree line, approximately 200 meters out. I counted 5, then 7, then more emerging from the trees. Infected. Stage 2s and at least 2 stage 3s, identifiable by their asymmetric gait and the enlarged cranial silhouettes. They were moving northeast to southwest, crossing my perimeter zone without approaching the facility directly. A migration pattern. I'd seen these before. Groups of infected moving in loose cohesion, driven by stimuli I'd never been able to identify. Sometimes they passed through like weather. Sometimes they stayed. This group was larger than usual. I counted 16 before they moved beyond my observation angle. They weren't approaching, but they were between me and the northeast corridor I'd prepared. If they settled in that area, the extraction team would drive directly into them. I checked the time. 6 hours until scheduled arrival. 6 hours for 16 infected to either pass through or establish a presence that would compromise my only safe approach route. For an hour, I watched from multiple observation points, tracking their movement. They drifted southwest, slow and purposeless, some stopping for long periods before resuming. By hour 44, most had cleared the northeast quadrant. But 3 remained. 2 stage 2s standing motionless in the soybean field roughly 100 meters north of the access road, and 1 stage 3 sitting on the ground near the tree line, its oversized head lolling in a way that suggested reduced motor function. 3 infected in the approach zone. Manageable for an armed team in armored vehicles, but a risk. If I was going to clear them, it had to be now, before dawn, before the extraction team arrived, before engine noise drew anything else to the area. I hadn't killed an infected in 2 years. Not from mercy, from pragmatism. Gunshots attract more infected than they eliminate. But I had other methods. The crossbow hanging in my equipment room was silent, and at 100 meters, I was accurate enough. The question was whether I was willing to leave my facility in the dark, cross open ground, and engage 3 targets who might not remain stationary once they detected me. I made the decision in under a minute. 3 bags stood packed by the service entrance. The extraction was in 6 hours. I wasn't going to let 3 dead-eyed remnants compromise the first genuine opportunity I'd had in a decade. I geared up in the dark. Crossbow, 6 bolts, knife, night vision monocular, dark clothing. No rifle, too loud if things went wrong. I moved through my facility to the east exit, a reinforced door that opened into a sunken drainage channel running parallel to the access road. The channel was overgrown, but passable, providing concealment to within 80 meters of the nearest target. I stepped outside. The air hit me differently than it did during daylight perimeter checks. Colder, alive with the kind of silence that isn't really silence, but the collective held breath of a world that hunts and is hunted. The sky was clear, stars dense above, a quarter moon providing just enough ambient light to navigate without the monocular. I moved into the drainage channel, placing each step on remembered ground. The channel was dry, no rain in 2 weeks, and the dead grass cushioned my footfalls. Ahead, barely visible against the gray field, 2 vertical shapes stood like corrupted monuments. The stage 2s, waiting for nothing, being nothing, existing in a state that someone, 240 miles away, claimed could be reversed. I raised the crossbow. The first bolt took the nearer stage 2 through the temple. It dropped without sound. A sudden absence of verticality as though gravity had remembered it existed. The second stage, too, reacted to the movement beside it, turning its swollen head with a grinding slowness that told me its cervical spine was compromised. I reloaded. 15 seconds. I'd practiced this reload 1,000 times in my equipment room, fingers finding the string, bolt seating into the rail, sighting through the gap in the crossbow's limbs. The second bolt struck low, neck, not skull. The infected stumbled but didn't fall. It produced a sound, a wet, compressed vocalization that carried across the flat field like a signal flare. I could hear it reaching out into the darkness, and I could hear the darkness responding. Somewhere to the southwest, where the migration group had gone, a distant chorus of similar sounds rose and fell. I moved fast, closed the distance to 30 meters, and put a third bolt through the creature's forehead. It folded, 2 down, 1 remaining, the stage 3 by the tree line, another 100 meters east. I was exposed now, standing in open field, no cover, the drainage channel 40 meters behind me. The stage 3 hadn't reacted to the vocalizations. Stage 3s often exhibited reduced sensory processing, their nervous systems too degraded to respond quickly. But it was sitting, which meant it could stand, which meant it could move. And stage 3s, despite their deterioration, could be terrifyingly fast in short bursts. I approached along the tree line's edge, using the tree trunks as partial concealment. Through the monocular, I could see the stage 3 clearly now. A figure that had once been a large man, seated with legs extended, head too large for its body, hands resting palm up on the ground. It was breathing. I could see the chest moving. The skin of its scalp was taut and mottled, stretched over cranial expansion that had distorted the facial features into something no longer recognizable as human geometry. 15 years ago, this had been a person. Might still be a person, according to Cassidy. Might still have a 19-year-old inside, waiting to wake up and find themselves in this ruined vessel. Grieving years they'd never remember. I stood 10 meters away, crossbow raised. The bolt was sighted on the enlarged skull. 1 trigger press, and the thing was eliminated. The approach corridor secured. The extraction timeline preserved. My finger rested on the trigger. Thomas Wren's voice echoed in my memory. I was 19. And then there's nothing. And then I woke up. I lowered the crossbow. 1 inch, then another, then entirely. I must be losing my mind, I whispered to no one. Instead of killing, I retreated. Back through the tree line, back along the drainage channel, back into my facility. I sealed the east door and stood in the dark corridor, breathing hard, the crossbow hanging at my side, and tried to understand what I'd just done. I'd left a stage 3 alive in my approach corridor. I'd compromised extraction security for a moral intuition that might be baseless. If Cassidy's claims were real, that thing sitting by the trees could be saved. If her claims were false, I'd left a lethal threat in the path of people coming to help me. Either way, the choice revealed something I hadn't known about myself. 30 years of killing infected without hesitation. And suddenly offered the possibility that they were still people, I'd hesitated. The possibility alone had changed me. Not the proof, I had no proof. Just the possibility. I checked the time. 4 hours until extraction. I dragged a chair to my observation post and watched the stage 3 through the slit. It hadn't moved. The southwestern infected chorus had fallen silent. The 2 bodies in the field lay still, slowly ceasing to be threats and becoming topography. Dawn would come. The vehicles would come. and I would leave this place carrying a choice I couldn't undo. A threshold crossed between the person who survived by eliminating every threat, and the person who recognized that the definition of threat might need revision. Dawn arrived in gray increments, color bleeding into the eastern sky like watercolor on wet paper. I hadn't slept. The stage 3 remained by the tree line. It had shifted positions twice during the night, moving a few meters in seemingly random directions, but hadn't approached the access road. I allowed myself to interpret this as acceptable risk. At 0700, my short-range radio crackled. Channel 7. Survivor Voss, this is Sergeant Okoro. Extraction team inbound, approximately 40 minutes from your position. Confirm receipt. The voice was deep, clipped, professional. I picked up the handheld. Confirmed. Approach from the northeast on the marked road. Be advised. 1 stage 3 infected approximately 100 meters east of the access road near the tree line. 2 neutralized in the field. Copy. We'll handle the stage 3 on approach. Maintain your position until you hear our vehicles at your service entrance. We'll give 3 horn blasts. Understood? 3 bags ready. See you soon, Voss. Okoro out. 40 minutes. I spent them standing at the service entrance with my bags, watching light strengthen through the seams in the roll-up door. I was aware of my heartbeat in a way I hadn't been in years. Not elevated from exertion or fear, but from anticipation, from the proximity of change. For 30 years, change had been something that happened to me. Infection, loss, collapse, entropy. Now I was choosing change, walking toward it. At 0738, I heard engines. Distant first, then growing. The distinctive rumble of heavy diesel vehicles pushing through low-growth vegetation. The sound triggered ancient reflexes. Hide, silence, disappear. I gripped the strap of my bag and fought those reflexes down. Through the concrete walls, I heard the vehicles slow. Heard tires crunch on the damaged asphalt I'd cleared. Heard them stop. 3 horn blasts. Deep, resonant, absurdly normal. Like being summoned to a parking lot in the dead world. I hit the manual release on the roll-up door and hauled it upward. Morning light flooded in, making me squint after the permanent dimness of my interior. 2 vehicles sat on the access road. Heavy Humvees, painted flat black, with welded steel plating along the sides and heavy mesh over the windshields. They looked brutal and functional, the aesthetic of survival rather than military regulation. 6 people emerged, all armed. Rifles, sidearms, body armor that looked homemade but effective. 4 men, 2 women, all in their 20s to 40s, all moving with the coordinated awareness of people who'd done this before. The lead figure, tall, dark-skinned, built like someone who still found enough calories to maintain muscle, approached me with his hand extended. Sergeant James Okoro. Good to meet you in person, Voss. I shook his hand. The physical contact, skin against skin, the warmth of another person's grip, sent something cascading through my nervous system that I couldn't have named or prepared for. 6 years since I'd touched another human being. The stage 3? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Secured. Rivera put a net on it. We're transporting it back for treatment. A net. He must have seen something in my face, because he paused. Standard protocol. We capture viable infected when we encounter them in low-risk situations. Dr. Osei's team processes them at the facility. Is that a problem? No. I looked past him to the vehicles and saw what he meant. In the back of the second Humvee, behind a reinforced partition, a shape wrapped in heavy netting shifted weakly. The stage 3. still alive, being taken somewhere that might give it back its name. No, I repeated. That's not a problem. Then let's move. Clock's running. He gestured to the lead vehicle. You ride up front with me. Gear goes in the back. I picked up my 3 bags, walked to the Humvee, stopped at the door, and turned back to look at my facility. The concrete face of it, unremarkable, silent. The roll-up door gaping open like a mouth mid-sentence. Everything I'd built, everything that had kept me alive. You okay? Okoro asked. Yeah. I climbed into the vehicle. Let's go. The interior of the Humvee smelled like diesel, sweat, gun oil, and something floral that I eventually identified as soap. Actual soap. Not the harsh lye bars I made from rendered fat, but something manufactured. Lavender, maybe. The dashboard was modified with additional instruments. A thermal scanner screen, a GPS unit that still showed satellite data. A radio array more sophisticated than anything I'd seen in 2 decades. GPS still works? I asked as Okoro pulled the vehicle into motion. Satellites are still up there. Most of them anyway. Enough for positioning. No cell networks, obviously. But the military constellation was built to last. He drove with easy confidence, navigating the overgrown road as if it were a minor inconvenience. How long since you've been in a vehicle? 11 years, maybe 12. It'll feel strange for a while. The speed, the noise, people handle it differently. He was right. The sensation of movement, of landscape sliding past at 40 miles an hour, was disorienting in a way I hadn't anticipated. My body had calibrated to walking speed, to the pace of a perimeter check. This felt reckless, exposed. The team member in the back seat behind me, a woman with short red hair and a scar that ran from her left eyebrow to her jawline, leaned forward. I'm Rivera. I handled your tree-line friend. You're the one who left it alive. I killed the other 2. But not that one. Why? I considered lying, considered deflecting. But these people had driven 16 hours to retrieve me, and they deserved honesty. I was told it might still be a person. Rivera exchanged a glance with Okoro. Something passed between them, not skepticism, something else. Recognition, maybe. Most loners we extract have no hesitation, she said. They've killed so many infected, it's muscle memory. You're different. I've killed plenty. I stopped, tried to articulate what had changed in me between the moment I raised the crossbow and the moment I lowered it. Once you know they might come back, the calculation changes. It's not elimination anymore. It's murder. Okoro spoke without taking his eyes from the road. That's the adjustment everyone at the facility has had to make. 30 years of them being monsters, now they're patients. It rewires how you think about everything that came before. Guilt, I said. Some people, yeah. The landscape scrolled past. Flat farmland gone feral, equipment rusting in fields, farmhouses collapsed under neglect. Occasionally I spotted infected in the distance. Solitary figures standing in fields, or small groups moving along the tree line. None approached the vehicles. The engine noise seemed to create a bubble of avoidance rather than attraction. Perhaps the sound was too large, too unfamiliar to trigger approach responses. How many people have you lost on extractions? I asked. Total? Across all 11 successful ones and the 3 failed ones. There were failed ones. 3. 2 where the survivor changed their mind and wouldn't come out. 1 where we arrived and found the location overrun. Survivor was gone, dead or fled, we don't know. He paused. Personnel losses. 1. A kid named Garrett. Second extraction. Infected mob at a river crossing we thought was clear. He didn't make it to the vehicle in time. I'm sorry. Costs of operations. His voice was flat, but not cold. The flatness of a man who'd processed the grief and filed it somewhere he could function around. I recognized it. It was the same flatness in my own voice when I spoke about Marcus or Mara or anyone else the world had taken. We drove. The sun climbed. The Kansas border approached. I watched the world move past me at a speed I'd forgotten was possible, and I felt something slowly unclenching in my chest. A tension I'd carried so long it had become indistinguishable from my skeleton. Letting it go felt dangerous, like removing a load-bearing wall and waiting to see if the structure held. Behind us, in the second vehicle, the netted Stage 3 made sounds I tried not to hear. We crossed into Kansas at midday. The border was invisible. No signs remained. And state lines had never meant less than they did now. But Okoro mentioned it in passing, the way you note a waypoint on a journey. The terrain shifted slightly. Less flat, gentle rolls beginning, tree cover thickening along waterways. At a creek crossing, shallow enough to ford but requiring careful navigation, we stopped. The team deployed in practiced formation. 2 on watch, 2 checking the vehicles, Rivera and another operative named Chen scouting the far bank. I stood beside the Humvee and breathed air that smelled of water and living vegetation, and felt the strange discomfort of being outdoors, without a weapon raised. "You should eat," Okoro said, offering me a foil packet. I opened it and found something that looked like a protein bar, but tasted like actual food. Nuts, dried fruit, something sweet holding it together. Calories dense enough to make my depleted body sing. "You manufacture these?" Facility has agricultural production. Greenhouse complex, livestock. Small scale, but enough for 300 people and growing. The protein bars are Cassidy's pet project. She insists that nutrition affects psychological recovery. She sounds like she has opinions. He smiled. The first genuine expression I'd seen from him beyond professional competence. More opinions than anyone I've ever met. But she's usually right, which is the annoying part. Rivera returned from the far bank. Clear. Some old tracks. Vehicle maybe 2 months ago. Could be ours from the last run. Let's move. We forded the creek. Water splashed against the undercarriage, brown and cold. On the far side, the road improved. Still cracked, still overgrown at the edges, but less degraded. Someone had been maintaining this route, clearing fallen trees, filling the worst potholes with gravel. Infrastructure, the small, persistent work of people building something rather than just enduring. "Okoro," I said. "The recovered infected. Thomas Wren told me he was 19 when he was infected. 15 years under. How does a person rebuild from that?" He drove for a moment before answering. "Slowly, with help. The facility has a whole wing dedicated to rehabilitation. Therapists, people who were therapists before, who remember how. Physical rehab for the motor damage, cognitive exercises, community integration, eventually. And the people who aren't recovered? The 300? How do they feel about living alongside former infected?" His jaw tightened slightly. "That's a more complicated question. Most people are supportive, theoretically. They understand the science, they believe in the mission. But when a recovered walks into the cafeteria and sits down at a table, and you can still see the scarring from the cranial swelling, and you know that thing might have killed people you loved." He stopped. "It's a process. Cassidy spends as much time managing community dynamics as she does managing radio contact. Conflict? Not violence, not yet. But tension, fear, the kind of prejudice that comes from legitimate trauma. It's hard to hate people for being afraid of the thing that destroyed the world, even when that thing now has a face and a name and says please and thank you in the lunch line. This was the complexity I'd been waiting for, the imperfection that made the whole thing more believable than a sales pitch would have. A perfect facility would have been a lie. A facility wrestling with the moral and social implications of its own breakthrough. That sounded real. And what happens when you cure them all? I asked. Every infected eventually. What then? Then we rebuild. That's the plan. Ambitious, maybe delusional. But it's a direction. And direction is more than most of us have had for 30 years. Direction. I turned the word over in my mind. For 3 decades, my direction had been simple. Survive until tomorrow. The idea of a direction beyond tomorrow, of a future that extended into years, into projects, into something that resembled purpose, was so foreign it almost hurt to contemplate. We drove deeper into Kansas. The sun tracked west. The facility waited ahead like a question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. I saw the facility before I understood what I was seeing. From 2 miles out, it looked like a hill, an artificial rise in the otherwise gentle terrain. Covered in grass and low scrub, unremarkable from any distance. Only as we approached along a road that curved around its base did the geometry reveal itself. Antenna arrays emerging from the summit, ventilation stacks disguised as natural rock formations, and finally, a vehicle entrance set into the hillside, like a mouth in a face of earth. Underground, I said. Mostly. 3 levels below grade, 1 partially above. The surface structures are minimal and camouflaged. From the air, it looks like terrain. The vehicle entrance opened as we approached. Heavy blast doors painted to match the surrounding soil, sliding apart on hydraulic rams that looked recently maintained. We drove into a tunnel. Concrete, lit by LED strips, descending at a gentle grade. The temperature dropped. The light changed from natural to artificial, and with that change came a shift in my internal state. From exposure to enclosure, from the vast vulnerability of the open world to something close to what my facility had provided. But larger. Much larger. We parked in an underground garage that held a dozen vehicles, more Humvees, several civilian trucks modified for rough terrain, a fuel tanker, and what appeared to be a converted school bus with its windows plated over. People moved through the space with purpose. Mechanics, logistics personnel, someone pushing a cart loaded with canned goods. The hum of activity, multiple humans engaged in coordinated tasks, was overwhelming in a way I hadn't prepared for. Okoro killed the engine. Welcome to 7. Take a minute if you need it. I did need it. I sat in the passenger seat and let the sounds wash over me. Voices, footsteps, the clang of metal, a distant generator. Someone laughing. Laughing. The sound was so unexpected, so architecturally wrong in the world I'd inhabited for 30 years, that it produced a physical reaction. My eyes stung, my throat constricted, my hands gripped my knees until the knuckles whitened. Everyone does that, Rivera said from the back seat, gently, without judgment. I breathed, counted, released. Okay, I'm ready. I stepped out of the vehicle and into a world that shouldn't have existed. People nodded to me as I passed, curious but not intrusive, as though new arrivals were uncommon but not unprecedented. Okoro walked me through a series of corridors, each progressively more finished. Bare concrete gave way to painted walls, then to walls with bulletin boards, notices, a hand-drawn map of the facility, a sign that read, "Cafeteria" with an arrow pointing left. "Cassidy wants to meet you in person," Okoro said. "Medical check first, standard protocol for all new arrivals, then intake, room assignment, orientation." "How long before I can see the research wing, the treatment process?" He gave me a look that was part amusement, part respect. "Most people ask about food first." "I've eaten. I haven't seen a cure." "Tomorrow. Cassidy's orders. She wants you settled before you process anything else. Says the cognitive load of arrival is already significant." She was right, and I knew it. Every synapse I had was firing at maximum, trying to catalog and evaluate and threat assess an environment that defied 30 years of learned reality. But knowing she was right didn't diminish the urgency. I'd spent 3 days believing in a voice. Now I needed to believe in evidence. The medical check was brief and professional, conducted by a quiet man named Dr. Patel, who checked my vitals, drew blood, examined my old injuries with experienced fingers, and declared me dehydrated, but otherwise remarkably intact, for a long-term solitary survivor. "You've taken care of yourself," he said. "That's rarer than you'd think." My room was small, 8 by 10, a cot better than mine, a desk, a shelf, a light switch that I flipped 3 times just to feel the luxury of illumination on demand. There was a window, which confused me until I realized it was a screen displaying a surface camera feed. Trees, sky, clouds moving. I sat on the cot, alone again, but surrounded by 300 people through walls that hummed with their presence. The dissonance was vertiginous. I met Dr. Lena Cassidy the next morning in a room she called her office, but which had clearly been a supply closet in the facility's original configuration. She'd made it hers. Desk overflowing with papers, a radio set up in the corner, photographs pinned to the walls that I realized were pictures of people. Survivors, the ones she'd reached. She was smaller than her voice had implied. 5'4" maybe, lean in the way that everyone in this world was lean, with gray threading through dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her eyes were sharp and direct, meeting mine without the social cushioning that I remembered from the old world. This was a woman who'd spent 30 years making life or death decisions and had stopped softening her gaze accordingly. "Elliot." She stood, offered her hand. Her grip was firm and brief. "You look better than I expected." "You had expectations?" 6 years alone. Iowa winter climate, single-point resource system. I expected more deterioration. She sat back down, gestured me into the only other chair. "How was your first night?" "I didn't sleep." Also expected. It takes time. The presence of other people after long isolation can be as stressful as their absence initially. Your nervous system is recalibrating. It feels like threat. Because for 30 years, other people were threat. Infected, raiders, desperate survivors competing for resources. Your brain built reasonable associations. Those associations will shift, but not immediately. I appreciated her directness. No coddling, no false reassurance. Just acknowledgement of the psychological reality and the implicit patience required. "I want to see the treatment," I said. She studied me for a moment. "You want to see it, or you want to believe it?" "Both. They're the same thing for me." "They're not. You can see a process and still not believe in it. Belief requires something beyond observation. It requires the willingness to update your model of the world. After 30 years of one model, that's a significant ask." "Dr. Cassidy." "Lena." "Lena. I left everything I built. I crossed 200 miles in an armored car. I'm sitting in an underground facility with 300 strangers. I've already updated my model. Now I need to understand what I updated it for. She nodded, stood. Come with me. We walked through corridors that grew more clinical. Painted concrete giving way to tiled floors, fluorescent lighting, the smell of antiseptic that triggered sense memories from the before time so vivid I stumbled. Hospitals, doctors' offices, the normalcy of institutional cleanliness. She led me through a secured door, keypad access, into a wing that was quieter, more controlled. The lighting was softer here. Rooms lined both sides of the corridor, each with a window facing inward. Patient rooms. We have 14 in active treatment right now, Lena said. Various stages of recovery. I'll introduce you to one who's in the later phases, someone who can communicate. She stopped at a door near the end of the corridor. Inside, sitting in a chair by a small desk, was a woman. Mid-40s perhaps, though the residual scarring along her hairline and the slight asymmetry of her features made age estimation difficult. She was reading, holding a book with careful concentration, lips moving slightly with the words. "Marie," Lena said softly, "you have a visitor." The woman looked up. Her eyes took a moment to focus, a delay I recognized from Thomas's hesitant speech on the radio. The lag of a brain rebuilding pathways that the infection had disrupted. "Hello," Marie said. Her voice was hoarse, the consonants slightly blurred. "Are you new here?" "Yes," I said. "I arrived yesterday." "From outside?" Her eyes widened slightly. "What's it like out there now?" The question was so innocent, so genuinely curious, that it broke something in me I'd been holding together with will alone. This woman had been absent from the world for years, locked inside a deteriorating body, moving without consciousness through a landscape of ruin. And her first question upon returning was asked with the tone of someone who'd missed a season of a television show. "Quiet," I told her. "It's very quiet out there." Over the following week, I immersed myself in the reality of Facility 7 with the same systematic thoroughness I'd applied to survival. I observed the treatment process, watched through observation windows as doctor. Osei and his team administered the prion disruption protocol to a stage 2 patient. A series of injections over 72 hours, followed by careful monitoring as the cranial swelling slowly reduced as motor patterns normalized. As the dead eyes gradually developed the spark of directed attention that separates consciousness from mere animation. I spoke with recovered patients when they were willing and able. Each conversation was different, yet each carried the same undercurrent of displacement. People who had been torn from time itself, set adrift for years or decades, now deposited on an unfamiliar shore and asked to live again. Some were adjusting, some were not. One man, recovered after 19 years of infection, spent most of his days sitting in the greenhouse, pulling weeds with mechanical repetition, speaking to no one. The therapists said he was processing. To me, he looked like someone who had decided that the world he'd returned to was insufficient reason to have returned at all. But others were different. Thomas Wren, the voice from my radio. I met him on my 4th day. He was taller than I'd imagined, thin in the way of someone whose body was still rebuilding from years of malnutrition during infection. He shook my hand and held it too long, the way lonely people do. "You're the one I talked to," he said, on the radio. "You convinced me." I didn't mean to. I wanted to help. But I didn't think I was convincing. I was just scared and rambling. Scared and rambling is more convincing than polished and practiced. He smiled. It was a young smile, 19 years old, preserved in amber while his body aged around it. Can I ask you something? What was the world like during the years I was gone? I told him. Not the horror. He'd get that from records, from other survivors, from the collective memory that pervaded this place. I told him about the silence, about the way nature reclaimed spaces with a patience that made human ambition seem absurd. About deer walking through downtown streets and birds nesting in bank vaults. About the strange beauty that flourished in the absence of human interference. Forests thickening, rivers clearing, the night sky revealing stars that hadn't been visible in a century. He listened with hunger. It sounds almost peaceful. It was. Between the moments of absolute terror, it was the most peaceful world has ever been. On day 6, Lena called me to her office. She had a proposition. You've been observing. I can see you're building understanding. I'd like to offer you a role, not as a patient, not as a passive resident, as a contributor. Doing what? Radio operations. We need someone managing our outreach program full-time. Someone who understands long-range communication, who understands what solitary survivors need to hear, who can build trust the way I built it with you. Currently, I do it alongside 30 other responsibilities, and it shows. We should be reaching more people. There are survivors out there, Elliot, within range, alone, running out of time the same way you were. The proposition was precise and strategic. She wasn't offering me purpose out of charity. She was filling a capability gap. I respected that. You want me to be the voice, I said. I want you to be a voice. Multiple operators, multiple frequencies, wider coverage. But you'd lead the effort. You understand the audience. You are the audience, or were until last week. I thought about my 19 years of transmissions. 7,000 messages into the void. The patience, the persistence, the refusal to accept that silence was permanent. She was right. I was built for this. I'll do it, I said. Good. She slid a folder across her desk. These are our current broadcast parameters and contact protocols. Review them. Give me recommendations for improvement by end of week. I picked up the folder. It was heavy, full of possibility. I began broadcasting on my 8th day at the facility. The radio room was vastly superior to my old setup. Multiple transceivers, an antenna array that could reach most of the continental United States on the right bands. Digital signal processing that pulled voices from noise with precision I'd never achieved alone. I spent 2 days learning the systems, then began my schedule. 4 hours in the morning, 4 in the evening, scanning, calling, listening. My message was different from Lena's. She'd been clinical, institutional, effective for people who responded to authority and structure. But I'd been the other kind of survivor. The kind who distrusted institutions because institutions had collapsed. The kind who needed to hear a human being, not a professional. This is Elliot Voss, broadcasting from a secure location in eastern Kansas. I lived alone for 6 years in a water treatment plant in Iowa. I ate cold beans and listened to static, and thought I was the last person who would ever speak on this frequency. I was wrong. If you're hearing this, I was wrong. There are people here. There is something being built here. I'm not going to tell you it's safe. Nothing is safe. But it's real. If you want to talk, I'm here. If you want to listen, I'll keep talking. You're not alone. I can prove it. The first week, nothing. Static, silence. The familiar void that I now occupied from the other side, not as supplicant, but as beacon. The inversion was profound. I'd spent 19 years calling into darkness, Now, I was the light someone else might be searching for. On day 12, a response. Male, elderly, somewhere in Nebraska. His voice cracked with disuse worse than mine had. He said his name was George. He said he'd been listening for 3 days before working up the courage to speak. He said he didn't believe anything I was saying, but he needed to hear a voice so badly that he didn't care. I talked to George for an hour, told him about Thomas, about Marie, about the treatment, about the facility, told him about my own skepticism and how it had slowly eroded in the face of evidence. He asked questions, sharp ones, skeptical ones, the same ones I'd asked Lena. I answered them the way she'd answered mine, honestly, completely, without overselling. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Take your time, George. I'm not going anywhere." I reported the contact to Lena. She was pleased but measured. George might come, or he might go silent like the survivor before me, who'd simply stopped responding. The mathematics of hope were uncertain. Not everyone who hears a lifeline reaches for it. But I kept broadcasting. Every morning, every evening. And the responses trickled in, slow, cautious, wounded voices emerging from years of silence like animals from burrows after a storm. A woman in Oklahoma, a pair of brothers in northern Missouri. A teenager, couldn't have been more than 17, somewhere in Iowa who'd been born after the outbreak and had never known the old world at all. Each conversation was unique in its desperation and its doubt, but they all shared the same fundamental question. Is it real? I couldn't offer them certainty. I could offer them my own story. I'd been where they were. I'd doubted what they doubted. I'd risked what they were being asked to risk. And I was here. The Oklahoma woman, her name was Diana, arrived 3 weeks after first contact. I was there when Okoro's team brought her in, watching from the garage level as she stepped out of the Humvee with the same shell-shocked expression I must have worn. She looked around at the people, the infrastructure, the evidence of organized life. And she started crying in a way that was silent and total. Not grief, but release. The letting go of a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was separate from her body. I didn't approach her. That moment belonged to her alone. But I understood it with an intimacy that no one else in that garage could have matched. 3 months into my role, I'd made contact with 31 survivors. 14 had agreed to extraction. 9 had been successfully retrieved. 2 had gone silent. 3 were still in the trust-building phase, talking to me daily, asking questions, circling the decision without committing. The teenager in Iowa, whose name was Kai, talked to me every evening for 30 minutes, asking about the facility with the specific curiosity of someone who'd grown up in survival and couldn't imagine anything else. "What do people do all day?" they asked once. "If they're not surviving?" "They work. They eat together. They talk. They argue. They build things." "Build what?" "Whatever needs building. Greenhouses, water systems, furniture, a school." "There's a school?" "For the children here. 12 of them now." A long pause. "I never went to school." "You could." "I'm 17. "There's no age limit, Kai." "Not anymore." They went quiet. I let the silence live. Didn't fill it. Didn't push. This was the art of it. Knowing when a person needed space to hear their own thoughts without interference. Lena had taught me that, though she probably didn't realize it. Her patience during our initial contacts had given me a model for how trust grows, not through persuasion, but through presence. Meanwhile, the facility itself was changing. Population had reached 340, 9 new extractions, plus organic growth from the surrounding area as word slowly spread through networks I couldn't track. The recovered wing had processed 23 patients successfully since my arrival. Marie, the woman I'd met on my second day, now worked in the greenhouse alongside the general population. Her movements were still slightly imprecise, a residual motor effect that Dr. Osei said might be permanent. But she laughed. She contributed. She was present in the way that survival demands. Not everything was seamless. The tension Okoro had mentioned, between long-term survivors and recovered infected, surfaced periodically in ways that required management. A confrontation in the cafeteria between a survivor who'd lost her family to infected and a recovered man who'd been stage 2 in the same region during the same time period. No violence, but words sharp enough to wound. Lena mediated. The survivor was given space. The recovered man was given counseling. The incident was discussed in community meetings where I watched people grapple with moral complexities that had no clean resolution. How do you forgive someone for something they didn't choose? How do you fear someone who is no longer what you fear? How do you rebuild a society from people who destroyed the old one? Not by choice, but by infection. These questions didn't have answers. They had processes. I found my own peace with it in the radio room, in the simple and profound act of reaching outward. Each voice I found was a thread pulled from the tangle of this broken world. A life drawn from isolation towards something collective. I wasn't saving anyone. The extraction teams did that. Dr. Osei's protocols did that. I was only opening doors, proving that someone stood on the other side. George, the Nebraska survivor, arrived 2 months after our first contact. He was 71 years old, frail, half-blind from cataracts that the facility's medical team would later correct. He found me in the radio room on his second day and stood in the doorway until I noticed him. "You sounded different than I expected," he said. "How so?" "Younger. On the radio, you sounded ancient." "Solitude ages the voice." He nodded, sat in the chair beside my station, and watched me work for an hour, without speaking further. Then he said, "My wife was infected in year 1, stage 3 within months. I always assumed she was dead." "She might not be." "I know. That's why I came." He looked at his hands. "Not to save her. I'm not foolish. She's probably gone entirely. But if there's a chance, even a fraction of a %, I needed to be somewhere that chance existed." "I understand," I said. And I did. Because that was why I was here too. Not for Marcus specifically. Marcus was almost certainly gone. But for the architecture of possibility. For the first time in 30 years, possibility existed. 6 months after my arrival, I sat in the radio room at midnight, running a quiet scan through the frequencies. Most of the facility was sleeping. The ventilation system hummed its constant note. Somewhere above me, through 3 levels of concrete and earth, the Kansas sky held stars I couldn't see, but knew were there. The radio crackled. A voice, faint, buried in atmospheric noise, barely distinguishable from the static. But after 19 years of listening, my ears were calibrated to catch human signal in any amount of noise. "Anyone, please, can anyone?" I leaned forward, adjusted the filter, pulled the signal higher, isolated it from the interference. A woman's voice, young, terrified in a way that wasn't exhaustion or despair, but immediate, present danger. "This is Elliot Voss at Facility 7. I'm receiving you. What's your situation?" Oh God, someone's there. Please, I'm in a building. I don't know where exactly. Missouri, I think. They're infected outside. Dozens. They've been here since yesterday. I can hear them. I have a radio I found in this office, but I don't know how long the battery. What's your name? Sahar. Sahar Amini. Please, I don't know what to do. Sahar, listen to me. I need you to stay calm. I need you to tell me about the building you're in. How many floors? Where are you in it? Can the infected get in? Her breathing was rapid, but she answered coherently. A commercial building, second floor, stairwell barricaded, infected on the ground level and outside. She could hear them moving below her. She'd been traveling alone, heading south from Des Moines, when the group appeared and drove her into the building. Sahar, we have extraction capability, armed teams. But I need you to survive until they reach you. Can you hold your position? How long? I ran the math. Missouri, she thought. 15 to 20 hours for a team to reach her, depending on exact location. Up to 20 hours. Can you hold? I have water, some food. The barricade is heavy. Yes, I think so. Then hold. Do exactly that. I'm going to stay on this frequency with you as long as your battery allows, and I'm going to contact our extraction team right now. I keyed the internal comm, woke Okoro, gave him coordinates approximated from her signal strength and bearing, rough but a starting point. He was operational within minutes. I could hear him mobilizing through the facility's intercom, the controlled urgency of a practiced response. Back on the radio, Sahar was still there, still breathing too fast. Sahar, help is coming. Now tell me, what were you doing traveling alone? Where were you heading? I heard a broadcast weeks ago, someone talking about a place where people lived, where they had a cure. I thought, I couldn't stay where I was anymore. It was dying. Everything was breaking down, and Her voice caught. I was going to die there. So I left. You heard my broadcast. It said, you're not alone. I needed that to be true. I closed my eyes, felt the weight of those words, my words, sent into the void, catching a life as they passed. It is true. I'm here. You're going to be here too, by this time tomorrow. Promise me. I shouldn't have. No one should promise anything in this world. But I thought of myself 6 months ago, alone in concrete, hearing a voice that offered impossible hope. Someone had made an implicit promise to me. Someone had followed through. I promise, I said. I stayed on the frequency for 4 more hours until her battery died. Then I sat in the silent radio room and waited for Okoro's team to reach her, counting minutes the way I once counted days on a concrete wall. Each one a line between where we were and where we might still go. She arrived the next evening, alive, exhausted, carrying nothing but the dead radio she'd used to reach me, held against her chest like a talisman. The world was still broken, but it was mending, one voice at a time. It's been a year now since I left my water treatment plant. Kai arrived last month. They finally decided. They're in the school, learning to read at a level they never had the chance to reach in a world that offered only survival. George's wife was never found. He grieves her specifically now, rather than abstractly. And he says that's better. I believe him. I broadcast every day. My voice reaches across the silence, and sometimes, not always, not even often, someone answers. Each answer is a small revolution against the 30 years of collapse that preceded it. Each answer is evidence that the world is capable of reversal, not just in the biological sense of Osei's treatment, but in the human sense, that isolation can end, that walls can open, that the static can resolve into a voice, and the voice can say something that changes everything. My name is Elliot Voss. I lived alone for 6 years and silent for longer. Now I speak into the dark every morning and every evening. And I wait, not with desperation, not with resignation, with patience and with proof. Someone is always listening, even when the static says otherwise.